Hi, this is the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Well, you know, Barack Obama, the President of the United States, he wants to drive a silver spike through the heart of the vampires on Wall Street. You know who I'm talking about, the J.P. Morgans, the Goldman Sachs, the denizens of the night, the zombies, the bloodsuckers. But remember, he's got to go after the entire blood-sucking industry, the blood-sucking industrial military complex, including companies like Cerberus Capital, run by former U.S. Treasury Secretary John Snow and former Vice President Dan, I can't spell potato, Quayle. Now, they bought a company 4 years back called Telecris Plasma for $82 million as part of their leveraged buyout firm. They sold it 4 years later for $1.8 billion. What does this company do? They suck the plasma out of poor people, and then they sell the plasma with a huge markup to rich people. Not only that, they've been charged with manipulating prices and conducting a plasma cartel on the international markets. And take a look at this ad from the company right now.
Earn over $200 this month while saving lives. Earning money and saving lives is easy when you donate plasma at Telecris Plasma Resources. We're looking for healthy people to become plasma donors. Your donations are needed to ensure our life-saving and life-enhancing therapies are available to the patients who need them. Your safety and comfort are our top priorities, and our talented staff is trained and has the expertise to make your donation as comfortable and convenient as possible. And you will be compensated for your time for doing the right thing. By donating plasma, you can help save lives while earning over $200 this month. Telecris Plasma Resources, where we're saving lives one donor at a time.
Wow, that's a good company. Hey, I got an idea for Cerberus. Why not get into the suicide business? Buy Swiss suicide clinic titan Dignitas. Yeah, you figure all the vampires on Wall Street, the bloodsuckers, they're going to create massive impoverishment in America on top of what they're already created. And this is going to probably cause millions more Americans to want to kill themselves. So why not cash in on that as well? Makes like a lot, makes good sense. All right, let's bring in political analyst Stacy Herbert. Stacy Herbert, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Good to be here, Max. I have headlines pertaining to Obama and bloodsuckers.
All right.
First steps toward a course correction. Paul Volcker prevails. Obama to propose new banking rules. These are it's being called the Volcker Plan. And it's being called a dramatic decision by Obama. And also, headlines are reading, Obama declares war on Wall Street. So with this Volcker plan, now Paul Volcker, of course, is the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank from 1979 to 1987. The new plan is going to stop banks from proprietary trading.
Yes.
That's where the bank bets on markets with its own money, often betting against its clients.
Well, Paul Volcker is going to come in with the silver spike to drive through the vampire heart of Wall Street. Is that the idea?
This is the idea. And one of the other important ingredients of this is that the banks are not supposed to get too big to fail. They're supposed to slow down consolidation. Now, let's play this little clip of Obama announcing this plan.
Never again will the American taxpayer be held hostage by a bank that is too big to fail.
So he says the economy will never be held hostage. But the first thing that happened was a classic hostage-taking maneuver. The markets fell.
Exactly. Tell the people about this, because a lot of people don't understand that, because like Wall Street controls the buying and the selling, especially Goldman Sachs with their high-frequency trading and other mechanisms. They actually control the market going up and down. It's not supply and demand anymore. It's market manipulation. So when they don't like something, they just crash the market. It's a form of financial terrorism. Tell the people.
Well, we saw this previously in the Bush administration with Hank Paulson. Remember going before Congress and telling them that they had better give him $700 billion in the TARP funds, otherwise the markets would crash.
Who could forget that?
And at first, Congress didn't give him the authority based on his 3-page document, and the markets crashed.
They crashed the market.
Like 700 points.
Yeah.
And then everybody freaked out and said, oh, my God, we're being held hostage, and we have to sign this law.
Exactly.
So headlines read, bank shares fall. U.S. stocks fall on worries about bank restrictions. But now, whether or not we're being held hostage again, let's listen to Timothy Geithner that very same evening talking about this Volcker plan.
How different would the banking sector look if everything you want is enacted? Right. We want to have a more stable system that does a better job of protecting consumers and meeting the needs of companies that need to raise capital, families need to borrow to finance their kids' education. That's our basic objective in this. To do that, we need to make sure banks aren't taking the kind of risks that will threaten the stability of the system. That requires a whole range of complicated, important reforms constraints. We've made a lot of progress in the House. We've got a very strong bill there, but we're now at a critical moment in the Senate. And we wanted to make sure at this critical moment, as we try to move this forward, we had the best set of ideas in place that offer the best prospect of a strong set of reforms.
So in essence, are you saying big banks need to be broken up?
No, this is not proposed that.
Oh, Geithner lying again. What a shock.
Or else Obama is. Somebody's lying.
Well, it's collusion.
It's collusion.
They should all be charged with racketeering and thrown in jail as racketeers. Until they figure that out, the vampires will run riot.
Well, the other important part of this equation of whether or not Volcker Plan can become law is the WTO, the World Trade Organization.
Ah, good. This is an excellent point. Explain to the people the WTO's role and why this is a huge cluster, and it won't go down.
America is a signatory to the World Trade Organization and thereby legally responsible for the contracts and the laws of the WTO, trade laws. So under the Financial Services Agreement, you cannot regulate the size of a bank, and you cannot regulate the derivatives. You cannot do anything to restrict the size of banks.
Right.
So if this Volcker Plan actually does become law, the likes of China will have a case against the United States.
Right. And then China can engage in financial terrorism by crashing the dollar.
Well, China has the biggest banks in the world now, remember.
And they have almost $2 trillion US dollars. So who's the bigger financial terrorist? China, America, Wall Street, Goldman, JP Morgan? You decide.
And then I have another headline. On the very day that Obama announced the Volcker Plan,
yes,
the Supreme Court rolls back campaign finance restrictions.
Right.
So the U.S. is bracing for a free-for-all. Apparently now all corporations in America can now spend unlimited amounts of money
right.
On any campaign, any political campaign, whether it's federal, national, state level, local level. So they could own the entire thing. But now it's so blatant. It's just open.
Well, yeah, Supreme Court members are themselves big owners of stocks. You know, they have to recuse themselves every once in a while because of their conflict of interest. But, you know, the fact is that they're just conflicted from day one. And it makes sense that they would be voting on behalf of their own pocketbook. So this Supreme Court is about as valid as the judiciary in Argentina circa 2000, 2001. They're just completely beholden to their corporate paymasters.
Well, you do bring up Latin America, and it does remind me kind of a banana republic. The original, United Fruit created basically the term banana republic by creating these nations where the population was unable to do anything about the political system. United Fruit would force in any president that they wanted. They owned the system, and it became very open when United Fruit was there, and the U.S. would send in under Eisenhower, like they overthrew Guatemala's publicly elected officials. And this is a situation where now we have the America is as much open as what it was pre-1954 in Guatemala, that United Fruit ran the system there. Now we have the same situation in America where corporations can openly just buy any politician they want.
Yeah, I mean, Goldman Sachs is like Wild Bill, Buffalo Bill in the Wild West. You know, go across the country killing Indians and killing buffalo. But the remaining Indians were like, not us, this will never happen to us. No. They all eventually found themselves on reservation and basically almost exterminated. This is like America today. All the existing people who live in America are being, gunned down essentially with financial derivative terrorist products, and they're being slaughtered wholesale. And the remaining Americans are like, well, it won't happen to us, it won't happen to us. Meanwhile, they're being forced into extinction.
Now, the Supreme Court decision was a 5-4 split, and it was pretty much the Republican appointees, led by Justice Roberts, who were all for overturning this precedence in the Supreme Court and allowing private corporations to have the rights of personhood, and to spend unlimited amounts of money on campaigns.
Now we have a couple of minutes here to go into this. Talk about this rights of personhood. This is
well, I'm
fascinating.
going to in one moment because I wanted to say the dissent came from Justice John Paul Stevens, who accused the majority of judicial activism. Now, this is always an accusation coming from the right or the conservatives, the Republicans in America, will often accuse the Supreme Court of judicial activism because they don't like any laws that are help the population, for example. If it helps people or poor people, they don't like that. In this case, they don't mind it. But Justice John Paul Stevens says the conceit that corporations must be treated identically to natural persons in the political sphere is not only inaccurate, but also inadequate to justify the court's disposition of this case. Now, I wondered to myself, why is it that suddenly, the Republicans are very much against human rights for real humans, but for artificial persons, such as a corporation, they seem to be all for human rights. They're all celebrating the free speech of these artificial persons. And then I remembered, why are they so in favor of artificial persons? And then I remembered this picture from a Republican convention, and this is Dick Cheney's wife, George Bush's wife, and Donald Rumsfeld's wife. And I thought, they kind of look artificial to me, don't they?
Well, blow-up technology's come a long way since those days. But, yeah, there's the Stepford president, the Stepford vice president, the Stepford Cheney, and the Stepford Cheney wife, Lynn Cheney. They're all basically automatons. They're all fighting for rights of computers they themselves want because they're machines, and their object is to kill humanity, and they're doing a good job of it. But corporate personhood makes no sense, as you point out. In other words, the corporate personhood is it's like they use it in a very abusive manner. Like they use the when a ship spills oil out there in the water, there's nobody who claims ownership of that ship. They use not a false flag. They use is it a false flag?
They use a flag of convenience.
Flag of convenience. Exactly. So this is another example of this. This is a legal precedent of convenience. It's convenient to say the corporations are people because it makes people money. At the same time, as you point out, they're destroying human rights and civil rights for their actual people because, again, it also makes money.
Well, in Timothy Geithner's earlier, the clip I showed you, he was talking about banks having the privilege of borrowing from the government at 0% and lending out to people at a huge markup. Now, I think that in America, people should start a campaign for persons to get corporate rights. Because look at Goldman Sachs, the biggest profits in the history of their company, paid 1% tax rate last year. Why? Because all of the income came through the Cayman Islands. You, as an individual American, and as we know from the last year, you can't do the same.
Right. So in other words, instead of trying to downsize Goldman Sachs and to make them smaller and to make it more difficult for them to engage in proprietary trading, which is basically riskless trading where they get the ability to borrow money with no interest cost, and if they make a mistake, they get bailed out, why not have people lobby for the same rights as Goldman? See, not only would this make more people more money, but it would give Goldman something that they desperately need, that's desperately lacking, some competition. The reason Goldman makes so much money is because they have no competition. They blew out Lehman Brothers. They killed Lehman Brothers in that controlled demolition. Remember, they took him out. It was a mafia mob hit. Bear Stearns was taken out, and now they got no competition. I give the people the ability to compete with this schmata on Wall Street.
Well, maybe the mafia can lead the charge saying that we want to put all of our crimes in an offshore entity so that we don't have to serve any time. We go to white-collar prison.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back.
Life in Russia would be so much brighter if you knew more about someone from first impressions. Meetfriends.rt.com.
In Vietnam, RT is available in Bao Son International Hotel, Fortuna Hanoi Hotel, Horizon Hotel, Daewoo Hotel, Intercontinental Hanoi Westlake Hotel, Sheraton Hanoi Hotel, Hilton Hanoi Opera, Somerset Grand Hanoi, Sedona Suite Hanoi. Park Royal Saigon Hotel, Caravel Hotel, Sheraton Saigon Hotel and Towers, the World Hotel Saigon. In the Maldives, RT is available in Royal Island Resort and Spa.
Okay, we're back. Stacy Herbert, tell us more.
Max, we have one final headline, which very much leads into your next guest. And this headline reads, Scandal. Albert Edwards alleges central banks were complicit in robbing the middle classes. Albert Edwards is an analyst at Societe Generale, and he asked, did the U.S. and U.K. central banks collude with politicians to steal their nation's income growth from the middle class and hand it to the very rich?
Give me a Y. Give me an E. Give me an S. What do you got? Yes. Yes, they did.
Well, basically, that's the answer he comes up with. And he said he was amazed how little political backlash there has been against the stagnation of ordinary people's earnings in the U.S. and U.K. And then he was looking to see how this was able to happen, how the wealth of the middle class was able to be stolen. And he reckons, did central banks in creating housing bubbles help distract middle class attention from this redistributive policy? He accuses the central banks and governments of redistribution over the last 20, 30 years, not in the way that many Americans shout on Fox News that there's socialism for the poor. He's saying it's been redistribution away from the bottom up to the top 0.1%. Not the top 1% or 10%, the top 0.1%.
Right, so they created the housing bubble. People had a false sense of wealth and savings. Then they pulled the rug out from underneath them, and what's left is a huge amount of debt. But all the fees that were charged to construct all the loans to make that possible are now in the pockets of the financial terrorists on Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, Warren Buffett, the whole crew. They're all terrorists. Who will stop them? Nobody. Well, anyway, Stacy Herbert, thanks once again for being on the Keiser Report, and I'm still beating you on the Twitter war. I'm still beating you on the Twitter war.
I'm gaining.
Well, not so much. All right, now let's talk to the renegade economist, Fred Harrison. Fred, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, Max. Good to be with you today.
Thanks for joining us on the Keiser Report. Okay, let me kick this off by asking you, in 1997, you predicted that a global housing bubble would ensue in 10 years. The global depression of 2010 would happen. How did you do that?
Actually, I deal with what is considered to be forbidden knowledge in economics. I look at the most sensitive indicator in the whole of the economy, which is the land market. And from that, I can deduce the trends. Now, there's nothing magical about this. If you look at the history of the Western European economy, we can see trends that repeat themselves every 18 years without fail. By looking at the land market, we can see exactly how the health of the economy is progressing. And from that information, I can date the main turning points in the business cycle. And that's how I did it back in '83, forecasting that 1992 would be the end of that cycle. And I did it in 1997 because it's simple arithmetic, frankly. I was able to predict the peak in the housing markets around the global economy, because now we're dealing with a global economy. And therefore, I was able to say that the bottom of the current 18-year cycle would be the coming year.
Why is there such a constant boom and bust cycle in our economies? And is there a way to stop this cycle?
The boom-bust cycle is programmed into the politics of, well, what used to be a monarchical system. It became the aristocracy's economy. Now it's a democratic one, but the underlying factors are still the same. The best gains are out of land. Not out of the stock market, not out of other exotic instruments. Actually, over the business cycle, the highest capital gains are to be made from land. That's the secret. But the way that the market is structured at the present time, we definitely get a boom after about 15 years into the cycle, which means that there has to be a bust because debt is created in order to overexploit that market, and the economy has to come to a grinding halt. And it's happened every 18 years for the last 200 or 300 years.
You argue that we should socialize land and privatize wages. What do you mean by this, and what would it achieve?
Well, actually, Max, I've already referred to this, haven't I? the socialization is actually recovering for the public, the community, the value which we collectively create. And changing the taxes by abolishing taxes on earnings, abolishing taxes on the profits we make from the investments out of our savings, means that we re-privatize the wealth that we create, we let people keep what they produce, and we collect to fund the public sector that shared revenue, which is crystallized in the land market as rental income. We use that to pay for public services. That's re-socializing what used to be the public revenue and privatizing people's private wages.
The average Brit seems to really enjoy housing bubbles. Any politician trying to stop property speculation with, for example, tax policy would surely be booted out of office. So how would you convince the British people that there is an alternative?
Yes, you see, now the British, it's an Anglo-American phenomenon, actually. Unlike the Germans, who do not view their homes as their castles, and therefore they invest more in productive activity, the Anglo-American culture is to view the home as the castle, which is now our nest egg, our pension fund. And so, yes, it's a political problem. They found out 100 years ago when the Liberal government actually did introduce a land value-based tax, but the House of Lords simply rejected any attempt at reform. And that culture of wanting to make money out of nothing, out of just occupying a bit of land, has seeded through into the democratic system, so that we even get shopkeepers now, people who work for wages in shops, wanting portfolios of properties, buy-to-let properties, to make money out of nothing. And so it becomes a political problem to inform them that actually all of this is against their personal interests. And yes, there hasn't been the political strength, the moral courage of our statesmen, not for 100 years practically, to change that crooked, that corrupt system of distributing income.
So how would you convince the British people that there is an alternative?
I know that what I've suggested is pretty well impossible, but actually, when you think that in the United States they would be collectively better off by hundreds of billions of dollars a year to share out among the population if they made this tax shift from taxing wages to raising revenue from land, that becomes an incentive. Everybody becomes richer. In this country, over the years of Tony Blair's administration, Britain lost wealth and welfare equivalent to 1 year's national income. Now imagine how many hospitals and schools we could build, how much higher wages could be if we had this tax reform. It takes moral courage by the stewards of our system of government to explain this to the public, and I believe that they would listen and want to make the change.
What would our economies look like today if we had land reform?
Well, now you're asking about the future, aren't you, Max? If we want a sustainable system of economics, if we want to be able to compete on an equal footing with the Far East over the next business cycle, the only option is to shift taxes off wages and onto the rents of land. What would that mean? It would mean the factory gate prices of products produced in Western Europe would become more affordable in the global markets. Without this tax shift, our goods will continue to be undercut by cheap labour-produced goods in the Far East. Now, this future is not a sustainable one. This is what the G20 economies have driven Europe and North America into, a situation of crisis where we will not be able to compete unless we change the cost structure. And the only way of achieving that is the tax shift that I've just explained to you.
How well have governments responded to the crisis? And what should they have done differently?
Governments have been abysmal in looking after the interests of the advanced countries. They've exposed Europe and North America to a Far Eastern economy that's actually going to gobble up most of us. Except for the German economy, it's my prediction that much of the rest of Western Europe and large chunks of North America are going to be in the doldrums for the next 20 years. And that's because our governments have just tried to inflate us out of this recession by using the very mechanism that brought us here in the first place. Debt was the way we've tried to maintain living standards, not by producing goods that are of any value, but by borrowing and spending. And that's exactly what governments are still doing, piling debt upon debt. They've socialised the private debts of the land speculators, putting the burden onto future taxpayers. And what does that mean for the rest of the business cycle that begins this coming year? A European and North American economy that is not fit for purpose. So I'm afraid that in terms of the scorecard, governments in the G20 economies have failed abysmally to take care of their nations.
Okay, final question. Fred Harrison, the renegade economist, you did predict the financial crisis. How do you see it ending?
Because of their failure to rebase their economies on a cost structure that's viable, what should have been just a recession will turn into a depression. It is now going to be more or less 10 years of lost economic output. Just as in Japan, just in the 1990s, as in Europe in the 1930s, and I can go further back, similar examples, ours will be a Western economy in the doldrums for about 10 years. There will be highlights, there will be money to be made by those who are shrewd enough to latch on to the forbidden knowledge which enable me to predict the trends, but for most people it's going to be a decline in living standards and a lot of unemployment.
All right, Fred Harrison, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max. It was good to be with you. Hope you have a good year in forecasting what's going to happen for your viewers.
And that's going to do it for this week's show. I want to thank my guests, Stacy Herbert and Fred Harrison. If you want to send me an email, please do so, keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying, bye, y'all.